Thought it might be fun to do some experimenting with polar coordinates using Affinity Photo's procedural texture filter. To get started, I'll start with a new document. I'll set it to 1024 by 1024 pixels and make sure it's in RGB mode. I'll fill it with black. That creates a filled pixel layer for my procedural texture to work on. And then I'll add a live procedural texture filter. I'll start with a single equation and assign it to all three channels. I'll add a single real number custom input, A, and set it to 6. I'll call that scale. I'm going to start by creating a variable v for the coordinate system. It's equal to vec2 of rx, ry times a divided by h, so the height of the document in pixels. Now I'm going to create a polar coordinate. I'm going to create another variable, vp, and that's equal to a vec2 of a tangent 2 of v.y, v.x. Now arctangent 2 will return a value between minus 180 degrees and 180 degrees. And so I'm going to divide this by 360. And that will give me a range from minus 0.5 to plus 0.5 for the red channel. And then for the next element, I'm just going to do the length of v. Now that we've got the coordinate system set up, let's try it out with some functions. I'm going to increase the scale to 2, and then I'm going to add a semicolon. To get started, just look at vp.y. You can see it has sort of a circular shape. And so if I put a step function around this and add an edge to it, e, and I'll add that as a custom input variable with a 0 to 1 slider. Change that to e. I can control the size of the circle by moving this slider. I'm going to change that to a smooth step now and add another variable. I'll call it e plus s as a second input for the smooth step, and add another 0 to 1 input, call it s, for this one. Okay, so that leaves a little smooth edge around the size of my circle. Now I'm going to add another variable. I'll add another 0 to 1 slider. I'm going to call this one, I'm going to label this one D, and I'm going to subtract off the D from the vp-y, so minus D. And so that also controls the size of it, but where this is subtracting off, it's going negative. So if I take the absolute value of this vp.y minus d, let's put that inside of an absolute value, and I see a little hole there. So if I make this small, I'll just turn this off. Okay, now this is controlling the size of my circle, whereas this one is controlling the thickness of the line that makes up the circle. So this is sort of like the points of the line, and then this is the size of the circle. I could add a little smoothness to this to change the size of the circle. I'm going to throw a gradient map on there, like that. Crank the smoothness all the way up, like this. So now I have a pattern like that. I can go like that, or like that, or like this. Next I'm going to add an oscillator, osc, of vp.x. I'm just going to add that to my vp.y. It looks like that, but if I add a parameter down here, I'll add a real number input. I'll just leave it with the letter B, and I'm going to call it points. I'm going to multiply my vp.x times b times vp.x. Now as I bring this up, I start to see some points come into this. And it'll work a little better if I also multiply by 2. Okay, I'll bring this back down. So there I have 3 points in my shape. There I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm going to bring it back down to 5. Now I would sort of like to have one of the points pointing straight up instead of off to the side here. And to do that, I'm going to add a custom input, an angle input. I'm going to call it TH, and I'll label this angle. Now up here, where I have the arctangent, I'm going to put that in another set of parentheses and add TH to this before I divide by 360. Now, one cool thing about polar coordinates is I can rotate it just by rotating this angle now. I'm going to rotate this down to 270 degrees. That gives me my point straight up. There I can create those shapes. I can adjust the line thickness, smoothing factor, and the diameter independently. Turn on my gradient, bring this way up, bring this down, bring this over. Now, it might also be nice on this oscillator to have another control. So I'm going to put in a 0 to 1 slider. I'll just call that C, and I'm going to have this be the amplitude of the oscillator. And I'll multiply that by C. That's set to 1. If I bring this down, we can have a complete circle, or I can introduce just a little bit or more of this effect. So that makes sort of a nice effect for that. I can also adjust these other parameters. I'm going to change the oscillator and try out a couple other oscillators. First one I'll try is osci. That's the square oscillator, so that looks sort of like that. The next one I'll try is oscrt. And sort of a look like that. Then I'll do the smooth curve oscillator. It looks like this. And I'll do the one with the circular edges. Looks like that. There's SQ. And finally, SQI. I'm going to turn off the gradient map. I'm going to replace the smoothstep function and the absolute function with an oscillator function. I have to get rid of one of these parentheses. Now, as I zoom out, I have this repeating pattern. I can create amplitude like that. And I can change the diameter of this, adding in the gradient map again. Just zoom that a little bit, like that. I'm just going to see what happens if I just take OSC of VP. now, and it's not too satisfying with this line here. To get rid of that, I could multiply the angle portion of this vector with the letter A, even though I'm already scaling it by A, and see how that looks. And that looks pretty good, but if I go up to an odd number, the line comes back. So it turns out if I multiply this by 2, then I can get rid of the line. So I have something like that, which is a little interesting. But if I had my gradient map to that, there we go. Now I can bring this up. Now I could change this to a different type of oscillator and see what those look like. So here's oscillator I, here's oscillator RT, SC, CS, SQ. I hope that polar coordinates will give you some inspiration for your procedural texture designs. All right, let me know if you have any comments or questions, and thanks for watching.